Time has come, the walrus said, to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings. What a silly question. Everybody knows that pigs don't have wings. Of course, there are some birds and insects, they have wings. There are even some mammals that have wings. So let's have our question. Would you like to have wings? Hold your card up if you'd all like to have wings. Let's see. Hold your yes cards up, right? Everybody, just one. Well, just a few. Don't know. Most of them like to have wings. That'd be a real feat of genetic engineering, wouldn't it? Well, we're going to, in this lecture, ask you a lot of difficult questions that are raised by genetic engineering. And you've got those cards. Let's have one of you hold up a don't know card, right? A don't know card. Next one, hold up a no card. And next one, hold up a yes card. So I'm going to ask you questions, and I'll say, hold up your don't know, or hold up your no or your yes. And I want you to be thinking about those questions and answering to them as I go through my lecture. Now, a few years ago, as I was passing through the customs, with nothing to declare, of course, I was stopped by a young, rather severe-looking customs officer. And he saw my passport, and it said professor on it, from Oxford. And he said, "What's your subject?" "Genetics," I said. Sure, he wouldn't know what that was. He said, thinking for a while. "I'd better let you go then, hadn't I? Otherwise, you might turn me into a frog." That'd be genetic manipulation indeed, wouldn't it? Well, you know, when I went to Oxford to the genetics department, we were making some changes in the buildings there, and this sign appeared, Alterations, Department of Genetics. A lot of people came wondering what we had on offer. So, let's look at these embryos here. Got an embryo of a rat, one of a rabbit, cat, pig, closest to the human maybe. There's the human. Can you tell the differences between those embryos? They're very similar. But the fully grown animals are different. We're quite different from those other animals. And those differences, of course, lie in the message of the genes, just as the differences between individuals do. Well, let's have a look at a living human fetus. So we've got an ultrasound machine here, and Dr. Hurley very kindly joining us, who's going to demonstrate the machine for us. Now, Dr. Hurley, maybe first you can just tell us a little bit about how the machine works.
Yes, well, ultrasound is simply high-frequency, non-audible sound, and we're able to beam the sound waves into the pregnant uterus and measure the reflections of the sound, and from those reflections make up a picture of the baby.
So you're getting a sort of a picture of the real-life thing, and as far as we know, it's really a very safe procedure, isn't it?
That's right.
Now, we're very fortunate. We've got Mrs. Sally Elliston, and she's volunteered to be scanned with the ultrasound. Now, Sally, I think you're going to lie down on here. And so what Dr. Hurley's going to do, he's going to use the ultrasound to have a look at Sally's baby. Sally, I think you're 18 weeks, isn't it? 18 weeks pregnant now. And she's got a bare hair tummy there. And then there's a little gooey stuff, isn't there, that we put on there. That's a sort of a jelly, so that the part of the instrument, the transducer as it's called, that actually does the business end, can get a good contact with the skin. So in this way, we can get a picture of Sally's baby in there alive. And we're going to be looking at this. Now, have we got it all switched on there? And have we got the pointer there? Have we got the pointer? Is the pointer? There's the pointer, isn't it? Now you're going to tell us what it is we're looking at there. That's the head, is it?
No.
No, let's see, where are we? It's being pretty mobile at the moment.
Yes,
there's the baby's head, isn't it? Do you all see the head? Do you see that little pointer there, pointing out the head there?
The white circular structure.
Yeah. And now let's see what else can we see. Is that an arm
That's
up there?
the baby's arm.
Oh, look at that. You can see the
forearm.
bones in the arm.
Running down to the
Yeah.
hand there.
Can we find the heart further down the body there, do you think? Oh, there it is. Look. Can you see it beating there? See it? The heart beating. Look at that, moving around. We got anything else we can see there?
So we can move. There's a short section of the baby's spine coming to the
Where?
picture
There.
Yes, just there, running down into the
Oh,
sacrum.
is it that? That bit, is it?
Yes, that's right.
Isn't that marvellous how we can see things? What can we find? Could we tell whether it's a boy or a girl? Do you think?
Yes, we are able to tell
Yeah.
in the picture.
Sally, do you want to know whether you've got a boy or a girl?
I don't mind.
You don't mind? What's the answer?
I can tell you that you're having a little girl, Sally.
A girl.
Yes.
You pleased?
Surprise.
And what else could we see there? If the baby was not the right size, something was wrong with it, you could see that too?
Yes, well, we can accurately date
Yeah.
the age of the pregnancy. We can tell that the baby's growing at the rate
Yes.
that we would expect.
And some serious abnormalities maybe you could pick up.
Yes, we can certainly confirm that most of the major organ systems are normal.
Good. That's super, isn't it? Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hilly, and thank you,
Pleasure.
Sally. So that's a marvellous way to look at a baby and even to find out what sex it is. Now, let's come to the first of our serious questions. Would you like to know, as Sally did, whether your baby was going to be a boy or a girl before it was born? Let's have the don't knows first. Don't knows first. Just one or two don't knows. Let's have the yeses. The yeses. Oh, mostly yes. Why would you like to know?
It would save a lot of time later on getting the name sorted
It would.
out and in furnishing nurseries
I
and
see.
things like that.
What about the nose? Any nose? No. Now then, let's hear it. Why wouldn't you want to know?
I like the surprise of when it's born to know what it is then.
It would, but just a surprise just then, isn't it?
Yeah, true, but I'm old-fashioned. I like
You are?
Yeah.
You'd like to wait. Okay. Well, now, there's another question. Suppose we took it a step further, and that's our second question. It's coming up there, and you've got it all on your cards. Supposing you could choose whether you were going to have a boy or a girl, right? Let's have the cards up first for the don't knows. Would you want to? Let's have the cards up for those who'd like to choose. Yes, if you'd like to choose whether it's a boy or a girl. Not many of you. Why would you like to choose?
Just like to choose
You would. What do you think you'd choose?
boy,
A boy. What do you think your wife would say?
a girl.
She'd say a girl. That'd equal it out, wouldn't it? So what about those who wouldn't like to choose the nose? That's interesting. Maybe that's a good thing because, thank you, because if we could choose, who knows? Maybe we'd have the wrong ratios of boys to girls in the population. Well, there are all sorts of genetic differences. And there's a catalogue of genetic differences, McCusick's catalogue, and it lists 3,000 inherited differences, many of them diseases. And of course, nowadays it's all set up on a computer, and you can have a list on the computer of all the different diseases that one can find. There you see it coming up there, and you can look up whatever disease, whatever difference you want. But it's not all diseases. There are normal differences in there. You recognize faces. Maybe it's only the identical twins that we really have trouble in distinguishing from each other. And there are inherited differences in the face. And there's one very well-known difference that occurred in a European royal family, the Habsburgs. Projecting jaw, it's called the Habsburg lip. And this is Rudolph, 1250. And then 300 years later, you see Karl V. And then about 100 years later, Carlos II. And then in the late 19th century, Albert, Archduke of Austria, the same lip. 600 years of inheritance in that famous European royal family of that particular facial feature, simply inherited as a dominant trait passing through the family from generation to generation. And maybe if we could sort out facial features with a photo fit like the police do, then we'd find other simply inherited attributes. Well, McCusick's catalogue lists a lot of genetic diseases of one sort or another, mostly with clear-cut inheritance patterns. And many of those are biochemical deficiencies, often a deficiency in an enzyme that's got to make something essential or metabolize something essential. And one of the commonest of those deficiencies in this country, a deficiency in the metabolism of a particular amino acid, phenylalanine, is the disease called phenylketonuria. And we've got here with us today Karen and her mother Marilyn, who are, Karen has this disease. It occurs in this country with a frequency of about 1 in 10,000. That means some 60 or 70 births a year. And the difficulty is that the children who can't metabolize that amino acid, if nothing's done about it, it accumulates, byproducts of it accumulate, and they're toxic. And if you don't do something about it, very soon after they're born, they become mentally retarded, an IQ of 20 compared to a normal IQ of 100, and they'd have to be kept in an institution for all their lives. Well, Karen, you're looking pretty well, aren't you?
Okay.
Yeah. What are you doing now? You're at school, right?
Yes.
Yes. And what stage are you at?
In the summer, I'm just about to leave the 4th year, and then I'll go into my high school.
And where are you going to in high school? Do you know yet?
I'm not sure.
Why is that? You're waiting for some results?
Yes, I'm waiting for the results.
Oh, I see. Now, how does it affect your life, having this disease? What's the main thing that affects you?
It doesn't affect me at all.
But do you have to do something about it?
Yes.
What do you have to do?
I have to have blood tests and special foods.
Special foods?
Mm.
Do you know what's special about the foods?
No, not really.
Not really. I wonder if we could ask Marilyn, your mum. I mean, how did you first find out that Karen might have a problem?
When Karen was 5 days old, she had a Guthrie test, which was part of the normal screening process. And at 12 days old, I was informed that her blood test had proved positive and that she was to be admitted into the local hospital, which was Queen Mary's Hospital for Children in Carshalton.
I see. And she's been on this special diet treatment since then?
And she's been treated by them ever since, and is still being treated.
And
yes.
Do you know how long she'll have to be on that, do they?
Not really, no.
Not. Were you surprised?
Very shocked, yes.
Did you know what was happening initially when they just did that test? Or?
No, she was my second child. I thought I knew all about it, and because the first one hadn't been, wasn't picked up.
And you've never had any troubles yourself at all, have you? So, you see, Karen is quite normal, very normal. And she's normal because she's on that diet, which corrects that inherited deficiency in the enzyme. And her mother doesn't show any effect. She's a carrier of the defective gene, and Karen's father will be a carrier too. And as you heard, there has to be a test done to find out whether a baby has that disease. And if we don't do that test early enough, we can't correct it with the diet. So all newborns have this so-called Guthrie test. Now, I've got an example to show you here, which we're grateful to the Great Ormond Street people for giving us. You see, you take just a heel prick, a little blood from the newborn baby, and you put it on a bit of blotting paper like this. And you can have the patient's name and all the information there. And when the blotting paper is dried, it can just be sent through the post. Because what you're testing for in this blood is the level of that amino acid that can't be metabolized. And that survives the post perfectly well. So what you do is when it goes to the testing laboratory, you punch out a little bit of that paper that has the blood sample in it. And then what you do is you put that bit of paper onto bacteria on a plate, and I've got a sample plate here, and the bacteria are treated in such a way that they'll only grow if they're given phenylalanine. So they'll only grow around a bit of paper that has phenylalanine in it. Now, these are test spots here, and you can see that halo of growth of the bacteria there. Those are the test ones. And can you see one positive result on that plate? You see that one? That one there? See it there? That's a positive result. The amino acid from that little bit of filter paper has spread around and allowed the bacteria to grow. It's a very simple, straightforward test that's done on everybody now. It's been done, since the 1960s. So all newborns can be screened to see whether they've got that disease. Now, there's a certain cost involved, of course, in keeping people on the treatment, the cost of the diet. So you might say, isn't it a rather expensive business to screen the whole population and then to have those 60 children every year kept on a diet? Well, we've got a balance here just to think about those costs. And if we think of each of these pound coins as £500,000, don't you wish they were? Then the cost of the screening might be about £1.5 million. And the cost of the treatment, well, that might be a little more for the 60. It might be another £2.5 million. So that might be the whole cost of screening and treating. But what about if you don't treat and screen? Think of the problems. First of all, the anguish to the parent with a child that's mentally retarded that could have been treated. But then there's a cost to that too. That child would have to be kept in an institution for the whole of its life. And that's a very expensive business. That's a very expensive business. That would cost, I don't know, a lot more than the screening and the treating. And so just in pure economic terms, let alone the relief of being able to treat, it's much better to screen and give the diet than to have a lot of those children in an institution. Now, there's a problem, though, that we've got to be careful of. And I wonder, Marilyn, whether we can ask you about this. You probably know that for your daughter, if she's going to have a baby herself, that's a time when she's got to be careful, isn't it?
Yes.
They've told you about that. Because if she's not on the diet then, her children might be affected, even though they've got the right genetic makeup.
Yes.
You've been told that,
Yes,
I'm
I
sure.
understood that.
And that's very important. It means we've got to keep track of children who've got that disease so that when they have babies, when they're pregnant, we put them on the diet, because otherwise they would induce the disease in a genetically normal offspring. So we've got to watch out for that, and that's very important. Thank you very, very much, Karen and Marilyn. Now, unfortunately, most severe genetic diseases can't be treated effectively in that way. But there are things that can be done, and one of them is sometimes we can detect very early during a pregnancy whether a disease is there. Now, one of the most serious and common of the mental retardations is Down syndrome. It used to be called Mongolism because of the very characteristic shape of the face and the eyes. And you can usually pick that up immediately after birth, although sometimes it's not all that easy to do so. And they're quite severely mentally retarded. And that's a genetic disease, and we can see that very clearly by looking at the chromosomes of children who have Downs. Now, I've shown you karyotypes before, and you'll remember that there are 23 pairs of human chromosomes. Now, can you see something different about those chromosomes? Can you see something different? There's an extra one, isn't there? There's an extra chromosome 21. Just that one extra little chromosome is what causes the problems with Down's disease. That causes the abnormality, that imbalance. Now, there's an interesting feature about Down's. It tends to occur very much more common in older women when they have children. The chance of having a child with Down's disease goes up nearly 40-fold from being the age of 20 when you have a baby to being the age of around 40 when you have a baby. And it's a real problem, Down's disease. Remember, it can't be treated. There's no treatment that we know of. So either you have to keep the child at home, or you have to decide to send it to an institution, or perhaps a mixture of both. And that's a very difficult decision to make. Down's children are often very lively, very sweet, very affectionate children. But the problem of looking after them is a real challenge and in some ways a burden, of course, to the parents and to the family. And it being untreatable, is there anything else that we can do about it? Now, the ultrasound pictures which we saw, they're not good enough. They're very good, but they're not good enough to see a Down's syndrome child at that stage. But there is something we can do. We can look at the cells at a very early stage in pregnancy, and when we can do that, that offers us the possibility to terminate a pregnancy if we find it's abnormal. And I want you to be thinking about that while we look at this picture. If you're a little bit squeamish, you might want to look away. You see, what's done here is this fluid surrounding the baby, and you can put a needle into that fluid, carefully managed from the ultrasound to know where it's going, to withdraw some of that fluid, which is just the waste fluid from the baby. But that fluid has some of the baby's own cells in it. So we can withdraw that fluid and use those cells to look at the baby's chromosomes. You see the fluid coming out there? That's the fluid we can use to look at the baby's chromosomes, to look at the biochemical differences, and do other tests on those cells. We can do that at about 16 weeks of pregnancy, giving us just about enough time, if there is an abnormality found, to offer a termination. Now, what's being collected there is about 20 milliliters of that fluid. And it's got cells in it, and on the microscope here, Cynthia's got a culture of amniotic cells, as they're called, the amniotic fluid surrounding the fetus. That's a culture of those cells. And from that culture, we can get a chromosome preparation, and on this microscope, we've got a picture of that chromosome preparation. And you can see the arrow there pointing to a spread of chromosomes. And we can analyze that in the way that's done there and find out whether there's an extra chromosome there or not. And so, in that case, we can find that out. Now, the reason we want to find that out is not just to know. The reason is because there is something we can do about it. We can offer the mother a chance to have that pregnancy terminated. The frequency of Down syndrome, although it's relatively high, 1 in 700, about 1,000 born every year, nevertheless, the chance of her having another Down syndrome child is very small. So really, you can look again anyway. You can make sure that the next child would be normal. So there's another question, and a very difficult question that we want to ask. Do you think it's reasonable that a mother who has a pregnancy in which a severely abnormal fetus, like a Down's, has been found early on, should be offered the chance to have that terminated, to have an abortion, so that next time she's got a very good chance of having a normal child? So let's have the don't knows hold up their cards first. A few of you don't know. A few of you don't know. What about the no's having up next? The no's having it up next. Now, let's find out. Why do you think that that's a bad idea?
I think it's morally wrong not to give a child a chance to live.
Even if it's very severely deformed? Is that, do you think that's a religious principle? Or
Yes, I think it is.
It is.
Yeah.
So some people don't believe in abortion because of their religious beliefs. Now, let's have the yeses hold up their cards. So there's a lot of you that say yes. Now, why do you say yes?
I think if there's a chance of having a good pregnancy and a good baby, then the parent will get a benefit out of having a normal child and a happy relationship with the child.
And the problem of having to go through an abortion to do that doesn't bother you?
Well, I don't think so, no.
No. Well, you see, there are varying views. And it's very important to let each individual make their own decision on these. There are religious attitudes that lead some people to believe that abortion is quite wrong. And it's a wrong thing for any of us to impose on anybody our views. We've got to let people make their own decisions on these issues. But now, who should we carry an amniocentesis out on? Who should we do that on? Because the majority of pregnancies are normal. And we don't want to do a procedure like that on a lot of normal pregnancies. But there's an answer to dealing with that, because remember that the frequency of Downs increases very much with the age of the mother. So there's a fair compromise. Supposing we do the procedure only on the women that are having their babies when they're older, say over 35. That's about 4% of all births. If we actually do this test on all of those women, we detect 20% of the total Down syndrome each year. And actually, when you work out the sums, that's a very cost-effective thing to do. It's something like 10 times more expensive if we had to keep those 200 a year Down syndrome for the rest of their lives in an institution or look after them at home with the costs involved, than it would be to detect them and offer the chance of a termination. It's even cost-effective if you did an amniocentesis, a test on every woman. But the trouble with that is you really want to avoid even the slightest risk of a procedure like that. So, as in the case of PKU, this sort of screening, which is now recommended for every woman over 35, is a really very effective way of dealing with at least part of that problem of a disease that we simply don't know how to treat. Now, the diseases that I've talked about, in particular the PKU, arises from parents who are both normal and carry the defective gene, and the fact that they carry it only shows when they have an affected child. But there's one situation where that's not the case, where we can pick up the carriers. And you remember I've talked about the hemoglobin disease, the sickle cell anemia, in which affected individuals have both their genes abnormal. And the parents, just like the parents of the phenylketonuria, they are carriers of the abnormal hemoglobin gene, a normal and an abnormal gene, and now you can pick it up. You can identify the mixture of the normal and the abnormal. Now, it's interesting that, in fact, as you might remember I told you, that disease was found first in a black American, and it occurs particularly in people who have an African origin. And it hardly occurs, if at all, in the typical white European. So that means that basically it's only worth screening people of African origin for the presence of this. Now, in this case, if you can pick them up, then, of course, you know you've got both parents are carriers. You can do the test to find out whether the fetus is a carrier without there having been an abnormal child first. But to do that, we've actually got to get a sample of the fetal blood, because the amniotic cells are not blood cells. They've not got any hemoglobin. So you can do that with a great deal of care. You can use a fetoscope. You can actually look into where the baby is, and you can take a bit of blood. You can take it out of the umbilical cord. That's fetal blood. And you can put a needle in there carefully to withdraw some of that blood and find out whether it's normal or not. So you can do the same thing. You see the needle going in there. You can do the same thing in a slightly different way. And if you've identified the carriers, and remember in this case you only need to test a woman when she first comes to the pregnancy clinic. If she's a carrier, then test her husband. There's no need to test the whole population at once. And there you see the blood coming out. So that's a test to see whether the fetus has that disease, and then again you can offer termination of a pregnancy. But that's a rather tricky procedure. And we know all about the sickle normal different. We know the precise letter in the DNA that's different. So isn't there something we can do to look at the genes? If we could look at the genes directly, we wouldn't need a blood sample. We could use the fetal cells that we get in this way. Well, there is a way of doing that. A combination of the enzymes that we've used that cut DNA that I've talked about, and the techniques for separating pieces of DNA of different sizes, and of radioactivity and X-ray films, genetic engineering techniques give us a simple way to find out whether there's a normal hemoglobin gene, an abnormal, both of one or both of the other. And here you see the result. These are the carriers. They have both the normal and the abnormal gene. And there's an affected one that only got the abnormal gene. We can pick up that difference in the DNA. We can do it directly with our genetic engineering techniques on a small amount of DNA obtained from those cells without having to get the blood sample. And that's an enormous advance. And what's more, there are new techniques that have come along that allow us to take the sample for our DNA much earlier during a pregnancy. Surrounding the fetus is the placenta. That's fetal tissue that feeds the baby. And actually, at about 2 months of a pregnancy, you can go in there, you can take a little bit of the placenta out, and you can look at that. And that's a sample of DNA. And we've got some under the microscope here. You see, that's a sample, we call it chorionic villus, of that placental material. And that's a source of DNA that we can get at 2 months. Not 4 months, 2 months to look at. And then we can offer the opportunity for a termination within the first 3 months, not halfway through the pregnancy. That's a tremendous advance. It's much better for the mother, for the family, and for everybody else. And if you put together that sampling procedure, getting that DNA, with what the genetic engineers can do now, essentially look at any difference at the level of the DNA, that broadens enormously the scope of what we can do in looking at genetic differences very early on in a pregnancy and doing something about them, whether it's treating, whether it's offering an abortion, if it's an abnormality, whatever it is. That really is a revolution in the way that we can deal with inherited diseases and detect them at extraordinarily early stages during pregnancy. Well, you might think with all this talk of genetic disease that there is a lot of genetic disease about. In a way there is, because you know, about 30% of the cases of children going to hospital are connected with inherited diseases. 40 to 50% of deaths in children under the age of 15 are connected with inherited diseases. But that's not so much because there's a lot of it, but because we've dealt with all the other things, the infections that used to kill us off long before. And also, of course, a lot of the diseases that matter, cancer, which I've talked about, arthritis, which I've talked about, heart disease, they are diseases of older people, and the children don't get them. Of course, they're also diseases which have a genetic component. So let's think about what the overall level of genetic disease is. We've got not quite 200 little balls in there. Think of them each as representing 0.5% of the population. Well, the one category of disease, chromosomal diseases like Down's, that's about 0.5%, equivalent of one ball in there. But remember, 0.5% is 3,000 cases every year, nearly 10 times the number in this lecture theatre affected by one of those diseases, even though it's only 0.5%. Simply inherited diseases, that's about 1%. It's also a lot. And then you see there's a genetic component. I've told you about it in relation to the tissue types and rheumatoid arthritis and diabetes. And we know that there are inherited components to a lot of mental disease, to heart disease. And when we add up all those inherited components to other diseases, that may be as much as 10% of the total, making it up that way. So although maybe 85% or more are quite normal from the point of view of their inheritance in disease, there's a significant component of genetically based disease around, which we've got to learn to deal with. Well, let's go back to the question of the sickle cell disease and think, are there other ways that we can deal with that disease? I remember, we can detect the carriers, and the affecteds will come from marriage between carriers. So supposing we screened all kids at school, and we found all the carriers, and they didn't marry each other. There'd never be any more sickle cell disease, would there? So there's another question. Supposing you were a carrier of the sickle cell disease, would you want to avoid marrying someone else whom you also knew to be a carrier? That's the question. And then there'd be no more sickle cell disease. Let's have the don't knows. Hold it up first, okay? Don't knows. Quite a lot of you would find it difficult to answer. Let's find out. I mean, let's ask you. Why don't you know?
I think it's very hard to say. I mean, if you're madly in love with someone,
Yes.
it would be very hard to think of whether you're thinking of yourself first or of the whole
Do you think
community.
if they carried a label saying, I'm a carrier, then you'd avoid them?
I don't know, it'd be hard to say.
Hard to
I
say.
try, but I don't know how well I would.
Okay. So let's have those who'd say, yes, I'd avoid marrying a carrier. Yes, yes. Okay, let's have you. Why would you?
Well, if you could stop the disease altogether, then it'd be a better thing for the world in general.
Yeah, and you know, 75 to 90% of your girlfriends, you'd still be able to choose from, wouldn't you? Lots to choose from, would it? Yeah?
Yeah.
Now, what about those who'd say no? Hold up your cards. No. They all seem to be at the top here. Well, they'll have to go up here. Now, why wouldn't you?
Well, you've always got the option of an abortion, of adopting a child.
Yes.
So you can still marry someone if you love them enough, but
Yeah.
adopt a child rather than having children.
Mm.
Or if you feel that you do want to have a child together, think very seriously about whether you could cope with the abortion.
That's right, that's right. So you can take your choice, can't you? You can avoid marrying someone who's a carrier, or if you do find that your mate's a carrier, and you know you've got a quarter chance of having it affected, you can either say, well, I don't want to take that risk, I'll adopt, or you can go through the procedures we've been talking about, and you can have a test done and opt for an abortion. Now, there's another approach, a quite dramatic approach, to screening for normality and abnormality. And that arises from the so-called test tube baby thing. Now, as you know, you can take an egg out of the ovaries of a woman, and you can see that coming up there. You'll see the egg coming out. There it is, going in there. You can put that into a culture dish and take it across to a culture dish under the microscope, and you can do the fertilization process in vitro, adding the sperm in the culture dish. In vitro fertilization. And you know there was a report, many of you have probably heard of it, the Warnock report, on that procedure, which raises a lot of interesting questions. The so-called test tube baby, Steptoe and Edwards. Now, that was devised in order to deal with the problem of infertility. How can it deal with the problem of disease? Well, you know you can separate out in culture at an early stage some of the cells of the embryo from each other. And you can take some of the cells that are separated and you can do those DNA tests on them as you wish. And then if you can keep the other bits of cells, the other part of the embryo, in cold storage, and here's a film, you can freeze those embryos and you'll see them freezing, and you can keep them in cold storage indefinitely and still use them to make a test tube baby. So that's a procedure by which you can test first, before you even start a pregnancy, whether there's any genetic abnormality. And you can only start if you're sure it's going to be normal. And you might think that that's a very much more satisfactory procedure than having an abortion. On the other hand, some people think it's not right to experiment with embryos in that way. And it's also a complicated procedure to have an in vitro fertilization. And you might think it's easier to have a test during the first 3 months of the pregnancy and have an abortion. It might be less of a problem. So there's another question that's raised, and it's raised by the Warnock report. The Warnock report says that experiments on human embryos should be allowed until the embryo is 14 days old, in the test tube, so to speak. So that's the question. Do you think that it's right to experiment with human embryos until at least they're 14 days old in order to deal with problems like genetic disease and infertility? Let's have the don't knows first again. Okay, let's have the yeses now. All the yeses hold up their cards. The yeses. So let's have Why do you think that's right?
Well, if it's going to help people with their babies, then it's, you know, a good idea to do it.
And you're not worried about the problems of experimenting with embryo?
No, not really, because it'll help people in the long run.
Yes. And at that early stage, an embryo isn't really identifiably human,
No.
is it? Yeah. What about the nose? Any nose? No. Well, let's ask you then.
I think it's morally wrong to experiment on human life of any form.
Even the tissue cultures that we have there? I mean, we've got cells. If I take a bit of my skin and I've got it in culture, I shouldn't experiment on it?
A particular form of human life which can become a human individual, whereas tissue cultures from your skin couldn't do that.
Yes, but then remember that perhaps 25 or 30% of all fertilizations are bought anyway, don't they, without us doing anything about them? It's a difficult question, isn't it? And some people... It is a difficult question. And there's been a lot of controversy about it. And some people, as you do, believe that there shouldn't be experimentation. And others think, well, it's a good thing to experiment and to find out, provided we monitor it carefully. Now, we've been talking about serious inherited differences that cause disease. There are a lot of minor disabilities, differences in sight. Some of you are wearing spectacles and they've got an inherited component. And there's one minor difference in whether people find it easy to learn to read. It's called dyslexia. Now, there are simple tests that you can do for dyslexia, which are a question of whether you can read a difficult passage. Now, some of you have got this passage on there, and others, you see, we've got it up here. Now, I want everybody to read out this passage, all of you together, and we're going to highlight each word as we go along in white. So I want you to read it all right. Once upon a time, a Tondirapsig named Gub found that ticks, Platonic ascries, so chalklish was he with his discovery that he myrtled a handful to show Con. Did it make any sense to you? No. Oh, there's some more of it. No? No, we're not reading the rest of it. No, we've just got that bit. Did it make any sense to you? No. But you didn't find it difficult to read, did you? Not unless you weren't wearing your specs like I was. Now, the thing is that, in fact, some people do find that difficult to read. And there are other tests that can pick up those difficulties, and that's what we call dyslexia. And very often you find more than one person in a family who's dyslexic because there's a major inherited component to that. Now, if you can detect that early enough, you can help people who are dyslexic, you can teach them to read properly so they don't have serious problems. And isn't that a good thing to do? It's just a bit like giving them spectacles, only it's helping them to read in another way than giving them spectacles. So it's important to realize these differences and to be able to pick them up in good time. Well, I've left some of the most difficult variations to deal with to the end. Behaviour, intellectual differences, ones we tend to know rather little about. Any of you left-handed? I'm not left-handed. Left-handed? Left-handed? Do you have a father who's left-handed? Anyone? Father? Do you know what sinister means in Latin? It means left. You're not sinister, are you? Huh? You are. But I don't think most of left-handed think they're sinister. In fact, you know, there's some evidence to suggest that left-handed people are a bit more intelligent than us right-handed folk. It's actually a major difference in the brain. But behavioural differences are actually very hard to measure. There's the IQ test, but that really isn't a very satisfactory test in many ways. Now, there are some tests that are reasonably objective of brain activity. They're tests for electrical activity, and we've got a demonstration here that we can show you. It's a test called an electroencephalogram. And I think, Emma, you're all wired up, aren't you? Do you want to come down here? And Anne is going to show us how this works. Now, Emma's been wired up. She's got those electrodes in her head. Don't you think it's a rather nice hairdo, that? And she's all wired up there. And those electrodes are going to be plugged into this box by Anne so that we can measure the electric currents coming from her brain. You can measure the activity of the brain in an overall sort of way by these electric currents. And what we'll see is on this machine, when we've got it all going, there's a chart that will go out, and these pens here, and they're going to wiggle according to the current that's coming out of Emma's brain, according to her brain activity. And you see, it's a sort of an overall measure of brain activity that is pretty objective. We can actually get a measurement, we can look at something. Now, Anne's going to start it all up to us, and we'll see what's happening. Now, why are we doing this? The reason is that different people tend to have different patterns. Are you laughing? See, when you laugh, see what happens. Keep quiet. If you keep quiet, then it'll settle down to its standard sort of pattern. And if you do these tests carefully, each of us tends to have a characteristic pattern. Cool, that's a lot of... And those characteristic patterns differ from one person to another. So they're inherited. They give us some sort of a measure of inherited differences in patterns. Now, we've done those tests. We can switch that one off. You see them going there. It's a bit difficult to get a good result, isn't it? Not fair on you there. So we did tests. Now, we did them earlier, and we've got with us again Karen and Elizabeth, right? Our twins. Now, just hold those up, you see. Karen and Elizabeth were tested. They're identical twins, remember. Genetically the same. Now, look at their patterns, and look at Emma's pattern, done before. I think you can really see that Liz and Karen's patterns are rather more similar to each other than either is to Emma's, can't you? That's a way of testing similarities in brain activity. Well, thank you very much, Emma, and thank you, Anne, for showing us, and thanks to Karen and Liz for being willing to be tested in that way. And you see, those sorts of electrical activities are thought to be associated with behavioral patterns. Some people think that certain patterns are more associated with the ability to think abstractly, others with being a bit of an extrovert, and other patterns maybe with being resistant to stress. And these are inherited, and perhaps a combination of these sorts of objective tests with other things that the psychologists can do, together with what the genetic engineers can provide us with differences in the DNA, will help sort out inherited patterns of behavior. But that's a very complicated problem. I'm sure most of us here believe that everybody should be treated equally. Do you? I'm sure you do. But you see, what I've been telling you throughout these lectures is that if by equal we mean everybody's the same, we're surely not all equal, because we're all different. We're different in all sorts of ways. So does it then make sense to give equal treatment to unequal people? I bet you'd be a bit frustrated if you were 5'6" tall and you were put on a basketball team. Or if you were couldn't sing in tune properly at all and you were asked to train as an opera singer. You might also find it a bit difficult if you got my build and you tried to run a marathon. But I can swim a mile or so when I've got to. Maybe you wouldn't want to have a bus driver who was so short-sighted that he couldn't see the traffic in front of him. You see, we're all different in all sorts of ways, and surely we've got to take that into account somehow in how we deal with people. We must treat them to some extent according to how they are and help them in that way. Supposing we could find inherited differences in the way our muscles worked, that could tell us whether we got the muscular properties to be really super athlete. So there's another question, Riyadh. Another question. Supposing you could be told by a genetic test whether you'd inherited an ability to become a super sportsman or sportswoman. Would you want to know, and would you try and take it into account? So let's have the don't knows hold up their cards first. Not many. Just one or two. Let's see if we can reach you here. Why wouldn't you want to know?
It depends on whether you like sport or not. If you like sport, well then you'd want to know so you can carry on and be an athlete. But if you don't like sport, it doesn't matter. Really.
But if you were told, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be a good sportswoman. Huh? What about those people Who would like to know? Yeses, yeses. Those who'd like to know. Let's. Well, I think we have that. Why would you like to
I'd like to know so that if I was good, then I'd be able to develop that and
take advantage of that
it.
skill. Yeah. What about the nose? Just the nose put up there. The nose. The nose. Let's see if we can reach you there.
Well, if people know that you're supposed to be good at sport and you don't want to make anything of that ability, then you might be coerced or forced into doing it if you didn't want to.
Well,
I think if you want to take it up, you can.
But then, supposing you could be told that nobody else knew. You can make your own decision.
Then it makes very little difference.
You can make your own decision. Would you like to excel at it if you knew you were able to?
I know if I can run fast or not because you can time me. I don't need to know from genetic.
Yeah, but you might be told at an early stage and then you could do training and so on.
Well, I'm not running as a toddler.
No, but you might be trained though. See, there are different viewpoints, aren't there, again? Some people might like to know, some people might not. And that's something that one day we might be able to do. Now, there are all sorts of inherited differences in ability, and they can be very difficult to sort out. And maybe we never really will know what makes a Bach or what makes a mathematical genius. But maybe we will learn more about that. Maybe we will find differences in the DNA that we can test for, that tell us, say, whether someone's really going to be a super whiz kid at maths and science, and, another's going to be good at languages and not so much in maths and science. Now, supposing we got to that stage, supposing we could really find out whether you'd got an inherited ability to, say, do science well, perhaps a little better than languages. Do you think we should use that information in schools for educational purposes to take that into account? Let's have the don't knows first, those who don't know whether we should use that sort of information. Let's have the nose next. The nose. Okay. Let's go to someone up here then. Why do you think we shouldn't do that?
Because everyone should have a chance to try everything, and they should do what they liked rather than what they're particularly good at.
Yes, but supposing we found that, you weren't terribly good at math, but actually you'd like to do it better, wouldn't it be helpful to know that we'd actually needed to help you a bit more to be good at math?
But then that would show in what I did.
And you don't think we could find it out a little earlier and help a little earlier?
But it was predicted... But I think it can show, and then, say you found someone who was good at something, they'd be pushed into it much too much.
So what you're saying, and I think we've heard that a few times, is that if we do find these things out, we should still let people make their own decisions. Now, what about the ones who do think we should use that sort of information in schools? The yeses. Let's have it for the yeses. Okay. Let's have Liz tell us.
Well, if you're good at a subject, then you can work for it and probably help somebody else with it as well. You can use it.
Yes.
Help other people.
So if we knew those things, we could adjust a little bit according to people's abilities. And that wouldn't be such a bad thing in education, would it?
No.
No. Well, whether we'll ever be able to do that, who knows? But maybe one day we will. Because there are people who are worried about these sorts of things. They think you can put it to bad use. But you can even put fire to bad use. The question really is, how far should we go with our genetic engineering? Remember the giant mouse I talked to you about? The one that had the gene for the human growth hormone put into its fertilized zygote, and so it developed from that? There's nothing in principle to stop us doing the same with people. Putting an ostensibly good gene into a fertilized egg and using that to make a test tube baby. Now there's a question. Do you think that that's something we should be thinking of doing? Should we be thinking of putting genetically engineered good genes into fertilized eggs in order to get them into people through the test tube baby technique? Let's have it for the don't knows again to start with. What about the yeses? What about the no's? Well, that's interesting, isn't it? So there are limits to how far, at least at the moment, we think we should be going with these sorts of techniques. Now, how many genes are there? Because that's an important question, because the fewer there are that we've got to know about, the more we can understand the differences between people. And remember that I've told you that there are some 3,000 million letters of the DNA language in all our cells, the equivalent information to 100 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica. But the genetic engineers working on the human genes have found out something very interesting. They found out that a lot of that information isn't actually meaningful. The meaningful information can just be in 3 volumes about. A lot of it not meaningful, and they've also found out that the genes occur in similar families, like the antibodies and the tissue types. So actually, the amount of information we need to know is only equivalent to 5 or 10,000 different types of genes. And remember McCusick's catalogue, it's already got 3,000 inherited differences. Maybe we're approaching a time when we'll know something about most of the genes that mean something. Maybe we're approaching a time where we really will know the complete message of the genes and be able to look things up and find out which gene is having what effect. The genes that would give pigs their wings. But I'm sure before we get to that, we've got to use our knowledge of the message of the gene to help a better understanding of the differences between people, whether they're within a country or between countries. So I've come to the end of my lectures, and it's important for me to thank all the different people that have helped. So first of all, I'd like to thank Bill from the Royal Institution and Melanie. Give them all a good hand, won't you? And Jean. And then from the Imperial Cancer Research Fund, Cynthia and Nigel and all their helpers who've done these experiments. We've got to thank the camera crew of the BBC and all from the BBC who've worked together with us in this marvelous way. We've got to thank the companies that have lent us equipment, the volunteers, all the many people who've helped us with material sometimes at very short notice indeed. I think we've got to give everyone a good hand for that. Now, I've asked you a lot of questions in this lecture, right? A lot of questions, a lot of difficult questions. I've got one last question to ask you. Have I asked you too many difficult questions? Too many difficult questions? No, come on, let's have it for the yeses. You see, the thing is, those of you who say yes or no, you're the ones, you're the generation that's going to have to answer those questions. Thank you.